I stood there in court trying not to cry as my ex-husband's lawyer tore me apart in front of the judge. She's broke. She can't even afford a home or decent food and clothes for the kids. Why should she get them? Her smirk stung more than the words. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself, still even though my hands were trembling. The judge nodded slowly, and in that instant, it felt like the air was being sucked out of my chest. All I could think about were Luca and Arya, my children, my whole reason for breathing. What would happen to them if they were handed over to Derek, a man who cared only about control and appearances? I didn't have a lawyer like he did, I didn't have much of anything. But I was there, I showed up, I was doing everything I could to fight for my kids even if the world looked at me and saw failure. Just as panic began to tighten around my lungs, I heard a small voice, steady, innocent, unshaken by the cruelty of adults. Mom, can I show the judge the letter I found in Dad's safe? The room froze. The hum of whispered arguments and shuffling papers collapsed into silence. Every head turned. Derek stiffened, his lawyer blinked like she had been slapped, and even the judge paused mid-sentence. I had no idea what letter my son meant. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might give me away. Still, I nodded. Luca, only 7 years old, walked toward the bench with a folded piece of paper in his small hand, and I knew nothing would ever be the same. I wasn't always the kind of woman who sat in a courtroom terrified to speak. Once I had been confident. I had a career friends who filled my evenings with laughter and dreams that felt tangible. But when I married Derek, everything shifted. He wasn't always cruel. In the beginning, he was charming, generous, and convincing. He told me I didn't need to work, that I should stay home with the children and let him handle the finances. "You've done enough," he said. "You deserve to rest." I didn't realize then what I was giving up: my independence, my voice, my safety net. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I became invisible in my own life. After Arya was born, the change in Derek accelerated. He was tired, irritable, always critical. Every dollar I spent was scrutinized. If I bought diapers without finding the cheapest price first, I was met with cold silence that lasted for hours. If I suggested going back to work part-time, he reminded me I had no recent experience and said, "We don't need your help. We need you to be a good mom." By the time he left, I had nothing. No savings, no income, no one in my corner but my children. Derek cut off the joint account, moved in with someone new, and hired a lawyer almost immediately. I couldn't afford one. I stood in line at the courthouse legal clinic for hours, clutching a thin folder of receipts, photos, and school records, anything to prove I was trying. I showed pictures of my kids eating boxed macaroni on paper towels because we didn't have clean dishes, and a letter from my landlord confirming I had never missed a payment. Our apartment was cramped, our heater barely worked, and sometimes I washed clothes in the bathtub by boiling water on the stove. But Luca never complained. Arya hummed little songs as I scrubbed her socks. I hid my exhaustion and shame from them, even when it broke me inside. My mother had warned me years ago. She said Derek looked at people like they were transactions, but I hadn't listened. I was in love. I believed in the illusion he painted, and now I was paying the price. On the morning of the custody hearing, Luca held my hand as we climbed the courthouse steps. "Is it going to be okay, Mom?" he asked, his big brown eyes searching my face for reassurance. I smiled, the thinnest smile I could muster. "Yes, baby. It's going to be okay." But deep down, I didn't know. Inside, Derek's lawyer walked with the confidence of someone who thought victory was guaranteed. She listed everything I didn't have: money, a stable home, reliable transportation, turning poverty into a weapon. She displayed spreadsheets of Derek's income, glossy photos of his pristine house, brochures for private schools. She painted me as a failure, not just as a woman, but as a mother. Each word was a dagger, and the judge's slow nods made them feel like verdicts. I sat still, silent, burning with shame. I wanted to scream, to remind everyone that poverty is not neglect, that love cannot be measured in bank statements. I wanted to ask Derek, "Where were you when I skipped dinner so there was enough cereal left for the kids? Where were you when I pawned my wedding ring for winter coats?" But anger in court doesn't look like strength. It looks like instability. so I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. And then, just as the weight of the moment threatened to crush me, I felt a small tug on my sleeve. Luca's eyes were wide, his voice barely a whisper. "Mom, can I say something to the judge?" I didn't know yet what he carried in his pocket. I didn't know how close I was to losing everything. All I knew was that my son was braver than I had ever been. The judge leaned forward, eyebrows raised in surprise. "What is it you want to show me, young man?" he asked. His tone softened in a way it hadn't been with me. Luca's small hands unfolded the paper, his fingers trembling but his voice steady. "I found this in Dad's safe. It has my name on it." Derek's face drained of color. His lawyer shifted uneasily, whispering something urgent into his ear. But Derek only shook his head violently, as though denial alone could make the truth disappear. My stomach twisted as Luca handed the folded page to the bailiff, who carried it to the judge. The silence in that courtroom was louder than any scream I'd ever heard. The judge adjusted his glasses, scanning the page. His eyes widened slightly, and he read aloud: "Custody transfer contingent on relocation. Primary caregiver deemed unfit due to financial instability. Child welfare to remain confidential." He paused, glancing up at Derek. "This appears to be a draft document prepared for the purpose of removing the mother from the children's lives permanently without disclosure to the court." The words blurred for me. My breath caught in my throat. A document in Derek's handwriting, hidden in his safe, outlining a plan to take my children and vanish. My son had just exposed it to the court. "Where did you get this?" the judge asked Luca gently. "In Dad's office," Luca whispered. "He forgot to lock the safe. I thought it was important. I didn't want to lose my mom." My heart shattered and healed all in the same moment. I wanted to pull him into my arms to tell him he should never have had to carry this burden. But I sat frozen because the truth was unfolding too quickly to stop. Derek shot up from his chair, red-faced and furious. "This is ridiculous. She's manipulating him. He's just a child." The judge's gavel slammed once. "Sit down, Mr. Carter." His voice was firm, unyielding. "If this document is authentic, it directly undermines your case. I will be ordering an immediate forensic review." I glanced at Luca, who was staring down at his shoes, his small shoulders hunched. He looked so small, yet what he'd done was monumental. I wanted to stand to speak, but my voice wouldn't come. My lawyerless silence, what had always been my weakness, suddenly didn't matter. My son had spoken louder than I ever could. That night, after the hearing adjourned and the judge ordered a recess for investigation, I held Luca close in our tiny apartment. Arya curled against my side, her thumb tucked in her mouth, unaware of the storm we had just passed through. Luca finally looked at me and whispered, "Mom, did I do something wrong?" I cupped his face, tears blurring my vision. "You did everything right. You told the truth, and the truth is never wrong." He pressed his forehead into my chest, and for the first time in months I felt a flicker of hope. I remembered the years with Derek, how he chipped away at me until I believed I was worthless. He told me no one would ever want me, that I couldn't survive without him. He controlled every dollar, every decision. He had planted seeds of doubt so deep in my heart that even after he left, I still watered them with fear. But Luca's courage was sunlight. He had dragged those lies into the open where they couldn't grow anymore. The following week, the court summoned us again. Derek's lawyer tried to spin the letter as a draft never meant to be used. But the handwriting was his, the signatures lined up, and the intent was clear. He wanted me erased from my children's lives. The judge's gaze cut through every excuse like glass. "Mr. Carter," the judge said sternly, "your behavior raises serious concerns about your fitness as a custodial parent. Until further notice, custody will remain with the mother. Visitation will be strictly supervised." My knees nearly buckled with relief. Tears slipped down my cheeks as Luca gripped my hand under the table. Derek exploded, shouting about injustice, about lies, about how I had poisoned the children against him. But his rage, the same rage I had lived under for years, only sealed his fate. The judge struck his gavel again and again until Derek's voice was nothing but a growl echoing in a chamber he no longer controlled. When it was over, I walked out of that courthouse with my children beside me. I had no money, no lawyer, no power. But I had something Derek couldn't destroy, truth carried in the pocket of a 7-year-old boy who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. That night, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the letter. My hands shook as I folded it back into an envelope. It wasn't just evidence. It was proof that love had outlasted fear, that my children saw me even when the world didn't. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself imagine a future, one where Luca and Arya grew up knowing that truth can fight lies even when the odds are stacked against you. One where I wasn't just surviving, I was raising them to be braver than I ever was. In the days after the hearing, the world felt strangely quiet. For months, I had lived with the constant drumbeat of fear, every breath punctuated by the possibility that I would lose my children. Now, in that silence, hope seeped in like sunlight through cracks in a boarded-up window. But silence has weight too, and mine was filled with questions. What would Derek do next? How long could safety last? At night, I lay awake listening to the rhythm of my children's breathing. Arya sometimes whimpered in her sleep, and I'd stroke her hair until she calmed. Luca stayed close to me, protective in ways a child should never have to be. He watched the locks on our door, checked the window latches, as if he carried the responsibility of keeping us safe. It broke my heart, but I also saw in him a quiet strength. He had learned too early what courage meant. The letter became both shield and scar. I carried a copy of it everywhere, tucked into my bag like a lifeline. I didn't want to look at it, but I couldn't let it out of my sight either. Every time Derek called, his number flashing across my phone like a warning sign, I felt its weight in my purse. He left voicemails filled with rage, demanding to see the kids, insisting I had turned them against him. I never answered. His words couldn't touch me anymore, not when the court had seen what he was capable of hiding. But still doubt crept in. Could the judge's ruling really hold? What if Derek appealed or twisted the truth again? My fear wasn't for myself, it was for Luca and Arya. They deserved stability, not the endless war their father waged. I tried to build normalcy. We had small rituals, pancakes on Saturday mornings, story time on the couch, with a single blanket wrapped around all three of us, dance parties in the kitchen when the weight of the world felt too heavy. I wanted them to know joy, to remember laughter, even in the middle of hardship. I wanted to give them pieces of a childhood Derek couldn't steal. One evening while cleaning, I found an old shoebox hidden in the back of a closet. Inside were photographs from when Derek and I were still together. Smiling family portraits, vacations, where the smiles masked tension, birthdays, where I stood in the corner like an afterthought. Looking at those pictures, I felt anger burn hot in my chest. For so long, I had believed the smiles. I had believed love could cover the cracks. But those photos weren't proof of happiness, they were evidence of survival. Luca wandered in and saw the pictures spread across the floor. He picked one up, a snapshot of Derek holding him as a toddler. His brow furrowed. "Was Dad ever nice?" he asked quietly. The question pierced me. I swallowed hard. Sometimes, I said honestly, but nice isn't the same as good. Luca nodded, too wise for his age. I think he wanted to look good more than he wanted to be good. His words, simple and true, cut deeper than any lawyer's argument. The next court date was set 2 weeks later, a review hearing to confirm custody arrangements. My anxiety built with every passing day, but Luca never faltered. He began writing small notes and leaving them on my nightstand. "We love you, Mom. You're the best mom ever. Don't worry, we're safe." His handwriting was shaky, the spelling imperfect, but those notes steadied me more than anything else. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully, my hands shaking as I tied my hair back. Luca slipped another note into my pocket before we left. This one said, "Truth always wins." I held on to it as we walked into the courthouse, my children's hands in mine. Inside, Derek sat stiffly, his face a mask of bitterness. His lawyer tried to argue that the letter was inadmissible, that it was a private draft, never meant to be acted upon. But the judge wasn't swayed. He had heard Derek's anger firsthand in the courtroom, had seen the evidence of intent. "This court cannot ignore the clear indication of bad faith," the judge said firmly. "Mr. Carter, you demonstrated a willingness to deceive not only your children but this court. Custody remains with the mother, and your visitation will continue under supervision until further evaluation. The gavel struck, and the sound echoed like freedom. Outside, Lucas squeezed my hand, a triumphant smile breaking across his face. Arya clapped, not fully understanding but sensing the joy in the air. I knelt to their level, tears streaming down my cheeks. "We did it," I whispered. "We're safe." But deep down, I knew safety was fragile. Derek wouldn't give up easily. He never had. And yet, for the first time, I believed we were strong enough to face whatever came next. Because my son had reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten: truth may bend under pressure, but it doesn't break. That night, I read Luca's note again before bed. Truth always wins. I tucked it into the shoebox with the old photos, letting it rest among the lies we had survived. It was proof that no matter how twisted the past had been, our future could be built on something real. In the weeks that followed, I learned that freedom has its own kind of silence. A silence that feels uneasy at first, like walking through a house after a storm, when the windows are still rattling, but the air is strangely calm. I kept expecting Derek to show up at the door to pound his fists against the fragile safety we had just built. But instead, he simmered in the distance, restricted by court orders, his calls fewer, his words clipped. The rage was still there, but it no longer had the same reach. For the first time in years, I began to breathe without flinching. I picked up freelance work, small projects at first, then bigger ones, and each paycheck felt like a brick in a foundation I was rebuilding with my own hands. The apartment, once a place of survival, slowly turned into a home. Luca and Arya helped me paint the kitchen a pale yellow, their laughter echoing through the walls. Arya drew flowers on scrap paper and taped them to the fridge. Luca built a fort out of blankets and declared it the safe castle. Watching them reclaim joy was like watching spring break through after a brutal winter. But healing is never linear. There were nights when Luca woke screaming from dreams where Derek took him away. Nights when Arya clung to me, asking in a whisper if Daddy was mad at her. I held them both, whispering back the only truth I had. "You're safe with me. Always." I carried my own nightmares too. Sometimes I dreamed of standing in court again, hearing Derek's lawyer call me unfit, broke, unstable. Sometimes I woke with the taste of blood in my mouth from biting my tongue too hard in sleep. Trauma lingers even when the threat is gone. But each morning I got up, made breakfast, and chose to keep going. Because survival isn't just about escaping, it's about rebuilding. One afternoon, while cleaning out drawers, I found the envelope with Derek's letter again. The paper had creases from being folded and unfolded so many times, the ink smudged from tears. I sat at the table, staring at the words that had nearly destroyed me. A plan to erase me from my children's lives. A plan that had been so carefully hidden, undone, only because my son was brave enough to bring it into the light. When Luca came home from school that day, I showed it to him again. "Do you know what this means?" I asked. He nodded, his eyes serious. "It means you didn't lose us. It means you saved us," I corrected, pulling him close. His small body fit against mine, but his courage was larger than life. "You should never have had to, but you did." He smiled faintly, then slipped another note into my hand. "Keep going, Mom." His words were simple, but they were everything. At the next review hearing, Derek's anger spilled over once more. He claimed I had brainwashed the children, that Luca had planted the letter himself. The judge didn't buy it. The more Derek shouted, the clearer it became that his mask was slipping. His lawyer tried to calm him, but Derek's rage filled the room, the same rage that had filled my marriage, the same rage that had silenced me for years. And for the first time, I didn't shrink. I sat taller, held Luca's hand, and looked Derek in the eye. He no longer had power over me. The judge ruled that Derek would enter mandatory counseling before any future visitation could be considered. For now, his time with the kids would remain supervised. Relief flooded me, but it was bittersweet. Because as much as Derek had hurt me, he was still their father. They still asked about him, still wrestled with love tangled in fear. I didn't know how to untangle it for them. All I could do was promise that they would never face it alone. Life slowly stitched itself into something new. I started attending a support group for single mothers who had survived custody battles. Sitting in a circle of women, I listened to stories of resilience, betrayal, and triumph. For the first time, I didn't feel like an outlier. I felt like part of a community that understood the invisible wounds. At home, we created new traditions. Friday nights became movie fortnights with popcorn in bowls and blankets stacked high. Sundays were pancake mornings even when I was too tired. I wanted my children's memories to be filled with love, not courtrooms, with laughter, not whispered threats. But the lesson I carried most was this: truth has a way of breaking through. Derek had tried to bury it, to lock it away in a safe, but truth slipped out in the hands of a 7-year-old boy who refused to be silent. And that truth saved us. One evening after the kids had gone to bed, I sat alone with the letter one last time. Instead of fear, I felt gratitude for the courage it revealed in Luca, for the strength it uncovered in me, for the reminder that lies only have power when they stay hidden. I folded it carefully and placed it in the shoebox with Luca's notes, our archive of survival, our proof that love is louder than lies. For the first time, I believed the future could be more than survival. It could be ours. Months passed, and for the first time in years, our lives found a rhythm that didn't revolve around fear. Mornings were filled with cereal bowls, clinking backpacks, slung over small shoulders, and rushed kisses at the door. Evenings brought homework spread across the kitchen table, Arya humming as she colored, Luca scribbling in his notebook before proudly showing me each page. There was peace in these small routines, and I clung to them like precious treasures. But peace did not mean forgetting. Sometimes when I was washing dishes or folding laundry, my mind wandered back to the courtroom, the moment Derek's lawyer called me unfit, the sting of humiliation, the terror of possibly losing my children. My stomach still knotted at the memory. Then just as quickly I would remember Luca's voice, steady and clear, offering the judge the letter that had changed everything. That memory steadied me like a hand pressed against my back. The children adjusted too. Luca grew more confident, more protective, always keeping an eye on his sister. Arya, though young, seemed to carry a new brightness, as if she sensed the storm had passed. They laughed more easily now. They ran through the apartment barefoot, unafraid of raising their voices. I realized how much of their joy had been stifled by the tension Derek brought into every room. And now, watching them grow, I promised myself they would never live under that shadow again. I began to heal in ways I didn't expect. I found work steady enough to cover more than just the basics. I signed up for night classes, determined to build a future for us that wasn't defined by survival alone. I even allowed myself to imagine dreams again, not the fragile ones I once had with Derek, but new ones planted in the soil of truth and resilience. Still, Derek lingered on the edges of our lives. Supervised visits continued, each one stiff and uncomfortable. The children went reluctantly, sometimes returning quiet and withdrawn. But over time they began to see what I had seen all along, that Derek's charm was a mask, his love conditional, his anger always simmering beneath the surface. And as they saw it, they grew less afraid. Truth had freed them too. One evening, as Luca worked on homework, he handed me another note. His handwriting was a little steadier now, his words a little more grown. "Mom, thank you for never giving up on us." I read it 3 times, tears welling in my eyes. I hugged him tightly, whispering, "It was never even a choice. You're my everything." That night, after the kids were asleep, I opened the shoebox where I had kept the letter and Luca's notes. I reread them one by one, tracing the ink with my fingers. The letter that Derek had hidden, meant to erase me, had instead become the proof that saved me. And the notes from Luca, simple, misspelled, sometimes scribbled in haste, had become the pillars holding me upright. Together they told the story of survival, of betrayal, of courage, and of love stronger than fear. Looking back, I realized the greatest betrayal Derek had ever committed wasn't against me, it was against the children. He tried to twist love into control, to make them believe stability meant money, instead of safety, appearances, instead of truth. But they saw through him. They knew me even when I doubted myself. In their eyes, I was not the failure Derek painted in court. I was their mother, and that truth was unshakable. The journey wasn't easy, and it wasn't over. Trauma leaves scars. But scars are not just reminders of pain, they are proof of healing. They show where we've been cut, but also where we've grown back stronger. I carried my scars openly now, not as shame, but as testimony. If you're listening to my story right now, I want you to know this: you are not powerless. Even when the world paints you as broken, even when lies pile up like walls around you, truth finds a way through. Sometimes it comes in the smallest hands, holding a letter that changes everything. Sometimes it comes in your own voice, shaky but steady enough to rise again. So please, if this story touched you, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need courage today, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like mine. Leave a comment. I read them all, and your words matter more than you know. Because at the end of it all, this isn't just a story about betrayal or survival, it's a story about truth. And truth, no matter how hidden, will always rise.